I've spent a lot of time with Xi Jinping, someone whom I have a great deal of difference with. And when I was vice president, my president told me that he wanted me to get to know Xi Jinping because it was clear he was going to be the head of Russia, of China, and we were having problems with Russia at the time and other countries as well. And so what he said was, get to know him. He's going to be there. And he couldn't because he was the president. He couldn't travel. So I traveled 17,000 miles with him throughout the country, our country, and in China as well. We were in the Tibetan Plateau, and he turned to me and he said, "Can you define America for me?" And this has been documented, it's real. I looked at him, I said, "Yes, I can," in one word. He looked at me and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Possibilities."
That was Biden saying that he traveled 17,000 miles with China's Xi Jinping, whom he said was the head of Russia. Yeah, welcome back to the program. It's probably why we don't have any kind of real policy relating to China.
It's just a stutter.
Yeah, it's a stutter. Kane, how dare you make fun of his stutter? That's the president of the United States, Joe Biden, for crying out loud. Let's go to we got a million things we can ask him about. Stephen Yates at YatesComs on X. You guys know him. He's on with us every Monday. He's with the America First Policy Institute, and he's chair of the China Policy Initiative. 17,000 miles with Xi Jinping, whom he also says, Stephen, is apparently the head of Russia as well. So Sisi's also, the head of Mexico apparently too. It's all confusing. I mean, who knows anymore? I just wanted to get I think it was at the governor's dinner or whatever. He sounded very tired. Just your initial thoughts on this, because that kind of stuff gets back to China, and China sees this, and geez.
Well, the Chinese actually keep records as opposed to, say, Americans, where there's no documentation for all of these frequent flyer miles. And was this on China's government jet, on America's government jet? Because I don't think the Chinese leaders actually get on America's jets and fly around. And what's he trying to beat some pop song to say he went 17,000 miles? Because that's going more than 10,000 miles.
Yeah.
And so he's, it's another version of him trying to be hip. I mean, all of this is more than just a little bit crazy. And who cares how many miles you might have gone? You say you spent all this time and you supposedly know this guy. So did you know that they were cooking up a coronavirus that was going to go out and hit the world? Did you know that he's the kind of guy that would put some fentanyl precursors in there and take over the money laundering for the cartels? Did you know he might be sending some military-age men across our border undocumented to do who knows what? So, I mean, what was the point of all of this? I mean, way back many, many moons ago, I remember the vice president reaching out to try to get to know the next leader of China, and we took that as a special project. And the one thing that stood out to me in 2002 was how little anyone in our government really knew about this stuff. So all Joe Biden's experiment proves to me is the deep state knows even less over time.
But apparently even less, and now we're seeing all of these. I was trying to look at the number that Bill Melugin was giving. You got thousands of Chinese nationals coming across the southern border now. That seems to me unusual, because I don't ever remember Stephen's stories in the past talking about people coming from different countries around the world. I don't ever remember hearing all these people from China coming in across the southern border.
Or other places. I mean, there was a concern after 9/11 what kind of composition of migration might there be. After all, if there were groups that were willing to send people to learn how to take off but not land planes, they might be looking to come across our borders with who knows what. And there was an Iranian assassination plot that was aimed to take place on U.S. soil, and it was tied into those migration flows. So this has been a topic of concern, but it turns out when you put out a big green go signal to the world, after a little bit of time, everybody wants to come. So there's people from all regions of the world that have now started to mix in, and I'm not shocked that you have a lot of working age, military age Chinese males that are making these treks too. And they might be carrying things themselves, or they might be hiring American mules to do their dirty work for them. But what's clear is the go signal was extremely dangerous. And we don't just have things flying over our territory now. We have people coming into our territory.
Ooh, speaking of that, flying over the territory. So the Pentagon, there's a brand new high altitude balloon intercepted. They think that this one is likely a hobby craft And this was after they shot down the other one that was literally like a, what was it, a high school? Kane, it was like a high school experiment, weather experiment. The Pentagon says that the latest high altitude balloon, it was a hobby craft. It wasn't a Chinese spy balloon. Yeah, that's all. It's just small, just a threatening, non-threatening balloon. It was intercepted. They said there was a fighter jet over Utah. NORAD confirmed it. Is it that difficult to tell the difference between a spy balloon from a hobby craft? Seriously, I mean, as somebody who has no experience with Chinese spy balloons, I mean, I just think that it might be kind of obvious. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, it's quite the hobby to be high altitude. These days, I don't know what it takes to get high over Utah, but it already starts out at high altitude, and I think it goes up from there. My maths might add up on that. But it's also several thousand miles from China. So how do we know? And who is this hobbyist? Is it Joe Biden's friend Xi Jinping, who has a hobby of flying high altitude
Yeah,
things?
he's a hobbyist. That's a great point.
I don't know how we did, but basically, as an American, and I speak for all Americans on this, I want no Chinese hobby balloons over our country. How about we just start there?
Yes. I wanted to add this as well. China's hitting out at sanctions, criticizing NATO over Ukraine. So I think that there's a war over information right now, because they had some people saying that Ukraine was going to get some F-16s and they would be able to bomb Russian assets, etc. Although apparently it was like a misquote from some leader who said that maybe they could get some planes, but didn't specifically say F-16s or from where. And China they've said that they're not arming Russia. The companies that have been hit by sanctions, though, from the EU, Britain, and the U.S., their ambassador told the United Nations that the alliance should, quote, refrain from acting as an agent of trouble, instigating bloc confrontation. The irony of this, Stephen.
Well, you would think that China would just say shut up and just say thank you if American F-16s were going to a theater other than Asia. Because that's actually where the F-16s should be going, where China has engaged in a massive air power escalation, and American policymakers in their infinite wisdom have held back on the most advanced aircraft being sold to our allies in Asia in recent years. And so you would think that they would just say thank you for sending our material to a different part of the world. But of course, I'm sure that Xi Jinping or whatever Chinese-speaking leader was crossing their fingers when they said that they were not arming or sharing armaments or whatever the jargon may be with Russia, because just every war zone America has found itself in the last couple of decades, there have very obviously been Chinese armaments on the ground. And so it's just one of those things where if their lips were moving, they probably were lying.
Yeah, which is kind of typical. This going into the sanctions and everything else, I keep seeing World War III trending. I wanted to kind of get looking at like a 30,000-foot view of all of this, because I know Russia and China do business together. I think that China's been helping Russia out from having their economy destabilized entirely, although China's economy isn't all that greater. But two weak entities does not a strong entity make. Knowing this and seeing all the scaremongering trends on social media, whether it's World War III or in NATO and all this other stuff that you constantly have to have, what do they call them? The fact checks on all of the posts that they have on X now. What should give it an example if you can. This is a weird question of what kind of headline would sort of get your antenna up of being like, this is different. This news story is different. This might actually be a real escalation. What kind of things make, like I said, kind of trip your antenna and that you look for and see as a little bit more than fear mongering?
Well, if I started to see the flow of this collaboration of do-no-gooders going toward the Asian theater, I think that would be opening up a lot of questions. Because it's one thing, it's very, very easy for middle powers and disruptive powers to break things, to disrupt things, to cause problems. It's a lot harder to corral power and pull it to where you want it to be applied. And so it's easy for China to give some fuel and some material to Russia's conflict with Ukraine and Europe and America. It's easy to flow things into the Middle East and sort of stir up the hornet's nest there. and just see where the chips may fall. It's a lot harder to draw some of that power and material into a conflict where you've got a lot at stake in your own neighborhood. And so I try to look very, very closely at what's sort of the annoyances and the encroachments in East Asia, South Asia, and what are the things that might actually change some fundamentals and really lay the groundwork for something truly different. And I don't know that we'll get a lot of warning on that front, but that's, I think, what gives me the greatest concern. To see China and Russia, Tehran, throw North Korea in, why leave little rocket man out, doing bad things or trying to insulate against sanctions, I consider that to be dog bites man. The other stuff starts turning back into man bites dog if it's coming back at East Asia.
I think that's a really good point because they can't really handle that in their own neighborhood. It's a lot easier to throw rocks, all the way, as you said, to the Middle East and that. But when that attention starts really shifting and the momentum, that kind of signals that they're ready for a little bit more. That is, yeah. Yay, now we have some nightmare fuel. That's great. Stephen Yates at YatesComs, always a pleasure. I hope that we don't have any interesting headlines for you next time, because that means that we're not edging towards further escalation, but who knows. We always appreciate your insight, though. You're the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. Take care.
Of course, you too.